Greetings, welcome to the show. This is The Overview, and I'm your host, Brother Mbogo. Today I'm going to take a look at what they call mind control, or subliminal influence, you might call it. Ways in which your mind is influenced and you don't even realize it. Some of the influence is obvious through watching certain type of programs that can influence what you think about society and certain things in society. But there's other types of mind control in which people are not aware that they've been influenced, even when they are. So that's the subject I'll be looking at. You know, this idea of controlling the way people think, one of the main sources of that is the media, what is allowed to be published, particularly in the mainstream media, on your views on certain countries, your views about even the food you eat is projected by major corporations. The food that we know is full of chemicals, they're projected as food that is good for your health. Even at one time, you can imagine something like cigarettes were promoted as something that is good for the health and good for your well-being, even though this is something that we know causes cancer. But when it's the right time for certain people to promote their program, they'll promote something that is definitely negative for you as something that is good. Later on, you'll find research going into a subject, or research that was held back at the time that the product was being introduced, detailing the negative aspects of a product. I'm sure when cigarettes were being designed, or when people did research into something like cigarettes, they found the negative aspects of it. But that was kept away from the public because the corporations that were making cigarettes wanted to make their money. But anyway, I'm going to first define this thing called mind control. And the term mind control is also known as manipulation, thought reform, brainwashing, mental control, coercive persuasion, coercive control, malignant use of group dynamics, and many other names. The fact that there are so many names indicates a lack of agreement. Well, that's what it's saying here, which allows for confusion and distortion. But all of these are forms of mind control. The fact that there are so many different terms doesn't mean that there's really confusion. It's just that you can define it in different ways. And this other thing called subliminal. Subliminal means that it's happening outside of your awareness. Although something, like for example, these adverts, these forms of influence, like when you're watching a movie at a cinema and there's a sudden flash of, say, a pack of cigarettes or a can of Coca-Cola. You're not aware of it, but it's somewhere in the back of your mind, you're aware of it, so you suddenly start thinking about either cigarettes or a drink, but you don't realize that you're influenced by some of these images that were flashing on the screen so quickly that you're not really aware of it, but it was there. Anyway, subliminal stimuli are processed by the brain without reaching conscious awareness, with the depth of neural activations influenced by factors such as task demands, sensory modality, masking strength, and top-down attention. Robust meta-analyses have demonstrated that subliminally presented arousing stimuli activate core brain regions, including the right amygdala, hippocampus, bilateral anterior and cingulate cortex, insular cortex, and primary visual cortex, with 9 of 12 studies involving subliminal phases contributing to the right amygdala activation. Those are different areas of the brain that these stimuli activate, and you may not even be aware that your brain is being activated. And then there's subliminal advertising, which is something that I've just mentioned, I think. Subliminal advertising is a supposed method of delivering marketing messages below the threshold of a conscious perception. A subliminal message is essentially a hidden message, visual or auditory, stimulus designed to bypass conscious detection, subtly influencing the audience without them realizing So the goal of subliminal messaging is to heighten the appeal of a product or service by shaping thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in the subconscious mind. So although you are fully awake and you're seeing, you're not aware that certain things are influencing your mind, because the things such, either the sounds you're hearing are influencing and you don't even realize they're influencing, or certain images are influencing the way you think or the way you feel. But because you're not aware that you have seen that image, it's affecting you, but you don't realize what is causing you to have a particular thoughts or emotions. And here, this goes back to a patent, a United States patent regarding sensory, I think it's the audio or acoustic sounds that can influence the brain or certain areas of the brain. In human subjects, sensory resonances can be excited by subliminal atmospheric acoustic pulses that are tuned to the resonance frequency. The half-hertz sensory resonance affects the autonomic nervous system and may cause relaxation, drowsiness, or sexual excitement, depending on the precise acoustic frequency near half-hertz used. The effects of the 2.5 Hz resonance include slowing of certain cortical processes, sleepiness, and disorientation. It further goes on to talk about these methods and apparatus can be used by the general public as an aid to relaxation, sleep, or sexual arousal, and clinically for the control of perhaps treatment of insomnia, tremors, epileptic seizures, and anxiety disorders. So some of these technologies have been patented. Well, this is one in particular, but there are other technologies which I'll mention later on. So that's the basic intro into what this thing called mind control is, although there are more aspects which I'll be mentioning in a minute. So, mind control, many people may know of the idea of mind control from certain documents regarding the CIA and the MK Ultra project, which was a brainwashing project which they were using or researching during the 1960s to see if they could control the minds of the general public and certain individuals who they wanted to use for some of their programs. So basically, we're talking about how it started, basically. And Wolf, a skinny little doctor with an overpowering personality, became fast friends with the tall, patricious CIA director, Dulles. And Dulles may have seen brainwashing as an induced form of brain damage or mental illness. In any case, in late 1953, he asked Wolf to conduct an official study of communist brainwashing techniques for the CIA. Wolf, who had become fascinated by the director's tales of clandestine world, eagerly accepted. Harold Wolf, and he partners with a certain person I'll mention in a minute. Harold Wolf was known primarily as an expert on migraine headaches and pain, but he has served on enough military and intelligence advisory panels that he knew how to pick up Dulles' mandate and expand it. He formed a working partnership with Lawrence Inkel, his colleague at Cornell University Medical College in New York City. So Inkel handled the administrative part of the study and shared in the substance. So this Inkel-Wolf model became, with later refinements, the best available description of extreme forms of political indoctrination. So it goes on to say that the Soviets started a new prisoner off by, this is the method they had used at the time to, I wouldn't say control somebody, but change their way of thinking. People who didn't think a certain way or were not willing to do certain things, you break them down until you can almost reprogram them. So the Soviets started a new prisoner off by putting him in solitary confinement. A rotating corps of guards watched him constantly, humiliating and demeaning him at every opportunity and making it clear he was totally cut off from all outside support. The guards then ordered him to stand for long periods, let him sit down, told him exactly the position he could take to lie down, and woke him if he moved in the slightest while asleep. They banned all outside stimuli, books, conversations, or news of the outside world. So you break somebody's spirit, basically, by telling them, forcing them to do certain things, and refusing them to even think for themselves. That's what I think the program was aimed to do, preventing people from thinking for themselves and doing things the way they want to do them. So you only do things the way that they want to do, things to be done. So this Wolf and Inkle became the chief brainwashing studiers for the US government, although the Air Force and Army ran their own programs. The secret report to Alan Dulles, later published in a declassified version, was considered the definitive US government work on the subject, that is mind control. It stated flatly that neither the Soviets nor the Chinese had any magical weapons, no drugs, exotic mental ray guns or other fanciful machines. Instead, the report pictured communist interrogation methods resting on skillful, if brutal, application of police methods. So they studied how the Soviets and the Chinese performed their brainwashing techniques or mind control techniques. And that was, that's the CIA basically. And it further goes on to talk about the types of behavior, four main types of behavior that people have, or what they see people have. Or the four categories of behavior. The individual may be unaware of well, first of all, his behavior itself. He may be whispering without realizing he is whispering, or he may move into a trap without knowing it. Then the relation of his behavior to some stimuli. The individual may be unaware of the fact that his interrogator is influencing him by saying right after certain statements and by remaining non-committal after others. The process called operant conditioning falls into this category. And C, number 3, the stimulus itself, because of its slight impact. The individual may be unaware of a very faint sound or a quick flash of light, unaware in the sense that he lacks the usual visual sensations. Subliminal perception falls into this category, as I was saying before, about certain audios which may be playing that is influencing somebody, or that flash of a picture or image which may influence what somebody's thinking about or what they're thinking itself, and they don't realize what changed their thinking or why they started thinking about a particular issue or subject. The precise nature of the stimulus as well as its relation to his behavior because of inattention, that's number 4. The individual may be aware of vague sensations, but he is not aware either of the source or of the significant content of the stimulation, although his behavior may change in accordance with changes in the stimulus. This category includes a great deal of perceptual activity affecting ordinary social behavior. So basically these images, just simple flashing of an image or a type of audio can influence somebody's behavior without them being aware that they're being influenced. So this is the technical side of this mind control, which was studied by the CIA back in the 60s, going into the 70s, I think it was. And continuing, these are 12 different aspects of mind control. They have this monarch mind control. This was also something coming under the US government or the CIA, part of the MK Ultra. This monarch mind control or monarch project, Project Monarch I think it was called. And looking here at the 12 different aspects of it. The selection of and preparation for the victim, that's the first stage. And it lists a number of things which represent the background of a victim, of somebody that is a good potential for mind control. I'm not going to go through all of them. Then you have the second one, traumatization and torture of the victim. So you use traumatization and torture to break somebody down. And then the use of drugs, which is obvious, everybody knows drugs and how the way drugs affects a person's brain. Then hypnosis, that is trance. Hypnosis or trance is something that also relates to, well, then you can say drugs also relates to spirituality, because some spiritual traditions use some form of drugs to bring out a form of trance. But then you have hypnosis or meditation, you might say. Meditation is usually when you put yourself into a form of trance, but hypnosis is when another party causes somebody to go into a form of trance in which they can now influence that person. But trance itself is an important aspect of the human mind, which they're using it here for ulterior motives, but in terms of spiritual growth, going to forms of trance is very important. And it's a major factor of being able to reach higher levels of consciousness. But in these westernized world thinking, trance is just is not even an important factor. It's just something that you can use in instances like this to hypnotize people, and it's a form of controlling people's mind, even though they don't know the greater use of the purpose of trance. The skill of lying. Lying is a form of mind control, because you're influencing the mind of somebody to think about things in a particular way, or other people in a particular way. When you lie about people, you want to form a different kind of thought pattern about that person that you're lying about. And the use of electricity and electronics, that is for torture, memory deletion, it mentions here, implanting thoughts. That one I'll go into later on, some of the more recent technology they have for implanting thoughts in people's minds. Then engineering and structuring of MPD system. Okay, and then finally the last two, body manipulation and programming, scarring the brain, split brain work. They can operate, because you have the left and right side of the brain, but down the center you can split the brain. The two sides, the right and the left, normally work together for somebody to examine and understand the world. But if you separate them, there's certain aspects of your brain which, when they separate, your brain doesn't coordinate properly. So they can do, those are the type of things they use to, most of that I think is used in researching how the brain works. Then scarring the brain, you can remove certain memories of, or certain capacities of the brain by scarring certain areas of the brain, which means you incapacitate somebody from doing certain things or even remembering certain things. Then the last one is mind manipulation by psychological program methods, behavior modification, psychological motivation, and so forth. So these were part of the monarch system of mind control. But I'll continue. This one continues to talk about scientists being able to manipulate memories and emotions, such as fear and anger, at the switch of a nano laser using a technique called optogenetics. Raphael Yuste, a biology professor at Columbia University, said that scientists have already succeeded in implanting in the brain of mice images of things that they hadn't actually seen, which affected their behavior. So you can use, talking about using a laser, some kind of laser to send images into the brain. They're saying they've experimented on mice, but I'm sure they've already started experimenting on humans with such things as well. So this is one of the future technologies that are being developed. Coupled with neuroprosthesis, the neural probes, intraneural tissue implants, and other developments in neurological research, the ability to control and manipulate the brain remotely is no longer science fiction. Just like Elon Musk's Neuralink and other companies that are working on the same thing. Where previously imaging permitted scientists to only observe specific kinds of disparate activity within the brain. Now functions of the brain are being mapped and altered in the same way that the human genome was, with similar attempts to intervene and manipulate neural functions for many different purposes. I suppose there could be good reasons for people who have Alzheimer's. I mentioned that earlier. I'll mention that later on, I think. And this one is talking about hypnotism. It's talking about music played an important role in the animal magnetism. The person who called mesmer, where you get the term mesmerism, which is like hypnotism. So it's talking about when he had developed that process, or when he had discovered, I wouldn't say he invented it, he discovered what magnetism and how it affects the brain can do. The techniques created from the 1770s by the German physician Franz Anton Mesmer that combined fixing patients with a literally mesmerized gaze and the theory of a universal fluid that could be manipulated to bring about health. What would later become hypnotism seems to have been a significant part of Mesmer's treatments, but it was his French pupil, de Puysegur, who coined the term magnetic sleep or artificial somnambulism for the hypnotic state often achieved by animal magnetism. Anyway, now this one is talking about using sound waves to influence the neurotransmitters in the brain. What I've done, I've looked at several papers and articles talking about the latest technologies regarding influencing the brain. I won't say mind control totally, but ways in which they can influence the brain and influence your thoughts, and even put thoughts into your brain, into your mind. The team of neuroscientists at Arizona State University found that LLIFU waves boosted the release of neurotransmitters, possibly by opening up sodium and calcium ion channels enough to trigger action potentials, which in turn release neurotransmitters. This means that without invasive surgery, physicians in the future may be able to undo the damage produced by diseases such as Alzheimer's by stimulating the production of the very neurotransmitters that the condition disrupts. So it's like bringing back life to the neurotransmitter areas in the brain, which Alzheimer's has caused to stop. And this, further going on further, I should say, as you might imagine, however, the effects of ultrasound on the human brain haven't inspired only therapeutic innovations. Various studies have reportedly theorized that ultrasonic weapons could be used to induce the vomiting and nausea in victims, perhaps during a riot control scenario. There's something I saw a few years ago. They're using, I think it was also ultrasound to cause burning of the feeling of burning on the whole skin, the top layer of the skin on the whole body. So that technology is already there. I'm not sure what's actually been used for riots and situations like that. But that's a form of, I wouldn't say warfare technology, although it could be used in warfare. It's a form of crowd control. That's how they're framing it at the moment. It's a kind of technology that you can use to control rioters. Anyway, and in terms, well, I've mentioned subliminal advertising already. So looking at those technologies in terms of human behavior, you know, the best way to control humans, not to control humans or to influence humans, is to be, I would say, to be genuine. But of course, those who run societies don't want to be genuine. They want to control people and deceive them for their own individual purposes, whether it's making money or whether they want people to go along with their political agenda, or they want people to fit into the society, into a society, a type of society. For example, they're talking about these 15-minute cities where you can only move 15-minute walk or bicycle ride 15 minutes, or you're supposed to do everything that you need in daily life within a 15-minute journey, bike journey or walking distance. Technically, it sounds, for local goods, yes, but if, for example, if somebody needs to get to university, they want to go and study, cities don't have that many universities that you can find a university within 15 minutes of where you are. So in certain aspects of society, you won't be able, unless of course they're talking about where now you study online, which means the need to attend university will decrease greatly in the future if that's how they're planning for society to run. But to physically attend certain places in society, you can't do it all within 15 minutes, which is one of the control systems that many people are talking. Although the issue of the 15-minute city, which seems to be a recent development, is the talk of these efficient cities. I think this is the term that they use, goes back to around 1900 or earlier, when they were looking at how they would design cities in the past. But in more recent years, they're talking about this 15-minute city where services for the society wherever somebody lives should be within a 15-minute walking distance. Anyway, as I was saying, I'll look at some of the, well, I've just looked at this laser that can affect the brain, and it mentioned these probes, these circuitry to the brain, which this is also getting more detailed about. The first brain-to-brain interface, BBI interface involving humans, the first case took place in the summer of 2013 when Rajesh Rao and Andrea Stucco, two computational neuroscience students at the University of Washington, were able to transmit thoughts between each other across campus. From a laboratory within the university, Rao used an electroencephalography machine to encode his thoughts while playing a video game. These thoughts were then broadcast to Stucco in another location using a Skype connection and then translated by transcranial magnetic stimulation. This machine was strategically placed over Stucco's left motor cortex, the part of the brain that controls movement of the hands. So one was on one side of the university and the other one was on the other. But they used as a device that could encode his thoughts and then send a radio signal of some kind to the other receiver on the other person's brain, and then it would decipher that signal and implant basically the same message into somebody else's brain. So one person is sitting here and he's being controlled by somebody at the other side of the university, which may cause his hand to move in a particular way. Anyway, Stucco then received Rao's thoughts, which involved hitting the space bar on his computer to get his character on screen to shoot, which she then did. Once again, the physical distance was to ensure no change of visual cues or communication outside the mental connection existed. And another instance of something similar to that happened this summer, whatever year that is, involved two neuroscience researchers who were again separated by thousands of kilometers of distance using the same combination of EEG and TMS technology. One researcher in India was able to transmit their thoughts to another college in France. So they're designing technology that maybe you can wear some kind of cap which is connected to certain parts of your brain and you send a message. Not even a message, you can send message instructions to another brain, not in terms of them receiving a thought, but they can receive an impulse to do something physical from the connection, from that brain connection. So that is where technology is taking. But mind control itself, as I was saying, when you want people, when they talk about mind control, there's obvious mind control, as I was saying, with people through adverts. Adverts is designed to influence the brain to buy certain products. And then the subliminal advertising, where images are flashed or sounds. Like, for example, when you go into you used to go into these department stores or arcades, and that soft music that you hear as you're moving around encourages people to move more slowly as they walk around the supermarket or the arcade or whatever. And that is obviously played by the owner of the supermarket, because they want people to move around and look at the goods and purchase. So it's a form of mind control as well. Anyway, continuing. Looking here at some strategies that are used in mind control. I'm not going to find out where this site is from. Here we are. Some subliminal strategies used in advertising. There's color theory. Color psychology plays an important role in subliminal marketing, with the brands openly using specific used to tap into consumers' natural emotional associations. Colors, particularly in a logo or packaging, are carefully chosen to reflect brand values and evoke desired customer responses. But they're going to look at, in terms of color and the image of black and white. Black and white are two colors which can have particular meanings. Black is, of course, people look at it as darkness, but associating it with race now, the Europeans have associated blackness with something negative, because it's also seen as, in terms of a narrative, when you say black or dark, it means something negative has happened. When you talk about light and enlightenment, the word enlightenment, for example, talks about light and leaning towards white, something bright. But something dark, like when they say the Dark Ages, which means you're living in a so-called primitive state. But then you look at people who are black, and you automatically, the Europeans would have you automatically thinking that because the person is dark-skinned, there's something negative about them. Yet their civilizations can be as advanced, or in the past, more advanced than the European. It was the European that was living in what you would call a dark state at one time, while other darkest races around the world were living a more advanced stage. But when the European began to rise and he traveled throughout the world, and he saw darker races, supposedly they're living, but even when they saw them living at a similar standard to themselves, many times they chose to hide that. They chose to destroy those societies and then falsely claim that people are living backwards. Well, they just basically lied about African races and darker races throughout the world, because they saw people who lived a different lifestyle from them, a lifestyle which they probably didn't understand, and one that was more connected to spiritual in a sense. People who were focused, as I mentioned, on trance. There are many rituals in Africa and across the world in the global south which included going into forms of trance. Europeans looked at this as something backward because they don't understand, they never understood what the purpose of trance was. They talk about it in more recent years, they talk about hypnotism and things like that, which you can just use mainly for mind control, but there are spiritual aspects of trance which were not pursued by Europeans because of their logical thinking, more recent logical thinking, which was based on the left side brain thinking, which is not the side of the brain, which is basically the left side of the brain doesn't deal with trance and going into spiritual states. That's more something that is focused on the right side of the brain, and the European mind is more left focused than other regions of the world. So their thinking is based on more materialistic and individualistic ways of thinking, and less spiritual ways of thinking. Not that they're incapable of being spiritual, but the focus of their brain in the last 400 years or so is a focus of their world in general, and the way they have led the rest of the world is on a more physical and materialistic path. because of the way their own brains are made up. Anyway, that's color theory. Let's move on to the next one. Next one is emotional appeals. Tapping into fundamental human emotions can be a powerful subliminal advertising technique. For example, Purina leverages the deep emotional bonds between humans and their pets to sell dog food. Dawn Dish Soap famously shows its products being used to clean oil discovered wildlife, often baby ducks, after spills, evoking empathy, concern, hope, and even guilt. So that's appealing to the emotions to control people. Then there's repetition. Repeating a message, an image, or a motive in an ad hoc can increase the chance that it will embed in the viewer's subscience or subconscious and possibly shape their behavior. For example, insurance businesses often repetitively use familiar characters across advertisements. Think Jake from State Farm, Flo from Progressive, or the Gecko. Well, these are, I think, are American images, which I'm not familiar with, so I'll leave it there. Then music and sound, as I mentioned music before. Music and sound effects are among the most widely used subliminal advertising techniques, as audio can be one of the more powerful forces in influencing thoughts and feelings. For example, licensing nostalgic popular songs for ads can evoke warm memories, brand trust. Even everyday sounds can have an impact. TV ads for cars often use the sound of a revving engine to suggest power and speed. These are basic everyday things which we all know. And we all know they influence your brain in some way or another, but people deliberately use them for certain purposes. Hidden codes and symbols. A brand might cleverly use camouflage letters, shapes, and symbols to convey a subtle message. For example, Hot Wings restaurant chain might use a graphic where the letters B and Q form a repeated background pattern in a TV ad, triggering subconscious association with barbecue. Okay. E-commerce and shipping companies like Amazon or FedEx often use horizontal rightward pointing arrows in logos and other promotional imagery to imply forward motion and speed. So that they use those subtle images to influence somebody to think that Amazon delivery service, well, where you order and their delivery service is quick and speedy. So you have that now formed in the back of your mind that this service is quick and speedy, and you don't know what has influenced you to think that way. You think that you have come to that conclusion yourself when you have not. Phonetic branding relies on phonetic symbolism, the power of sounds to suggest certain attributes and features. Examples include a hard K or C sound to suggest strength or hardness. Hey, okay. That's interesting. That is very interesting. There have been there are legal aspects basically to this use of technologies, particularly the ones that I mentioned in terms of influencing the mind with these lasers and so forth. Countries like Chile, Mexico, and others are designing legislation to fight against companies or the government or whoever to using these technologies to influence people's brains. It's seen almost as it's a form of human rights, the rights to not be disturbed or influenced by these distant technologies or these remote technologies. So Chile became the first country to legislate on neurotechnology that can manipulate one's mind, focusing on the rights to personal identity, free will, and mental privacy, raising concerns that scientific and technological development must be at the service of people and carried out with respect for life and physical and mental integrity. That's what their Chamber of Deputies said in a statement. What is hopefully the first state regulatory response of many addresses protecting citizens' privacy and hopefully human rights What this legislation does not address is the use of these technologies outside of the context of peacetime, namely during the armed conflict. Okay. So in everyday use, there's legislation to prevent them being used or misused against people. But in terms of wartime situations, but this is Chile's document. There are other documents or other countries are forming legislation. I don't know if those countries will have within their legislation something against using these technologies during wartime. These technologies have the ability to, and are actively being exploited by the military to manipulate human behavior and memory, or to induce fear or anger. And this one goes on to talk about lasers again. Recent advances involving lasers are increasingly not applied in a traditional weapon sense, in that their effects are neurological and reversible. Optogenetics provides the opportunity to influence the brain at specific times to exhibit specific behaviors. Increased understanding of how memory, emotion, and cognition work will also almost certainly result in the manipulation of these functions. So these technologies, legislation has been formed, which is fair enough. Countries are worried about how these technologies will be used, but if they're not legislating about how they're used in wartime situations, people can manipulate this or argue, if they're using these technologies, that the situation is almost a warlike situation, so it can be used. You never know what these Western governments, how they frame their narratives to enable them to do the things they want. So that's to look at some of the recent technologies. I touched on the past with the CIA and MK Ultra and so forth. But it's a look at some of the technologies that are being used and developed to manipulate the brain. And some of the, well, not even technologies, some of the strategies have always been used. Everyday people might use a particular strategy if they know a color is going to cause people to think a certain way or buy their product. Obviously, you're going to use it because you want to make your money. But when it's used by large corporations, and those large corporations are selling products which are not good for their health, and they're using these forms of mind control or mind influence to sell their products, then they're doing it in a way that is causing damage to the health of people and the damage to society in general. So mind control is something that you can almost argue some of it is normal. People want to influence others for their own purposes, for some kind of gain, whether it's just to bring them in line with their way of thinking, or whether they want to enable them or have them use a product which they're selling, or whether they want to control the whole society to fit into a narrative in which they can remain in power, which is what governments will use mind control for, or certain governments, I should say. But anyway, let's look at this mind control issue. That's it for now.